listeners, and welcome to the latest episode of Extra Extra, It's All About Whiskey, your bi-weekly podcast where Jason, 3 names, and Joshua, the Whiskey Whippet, get together and discuss a whiskey news story of the day, sometimes branching into some other things. We discuss for the first half, we riff for the second half, and we always try to get out of here in a tight 30/35 minutes. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we succeed, sometimes we fail, but we always enjoy ourselves.
That's true. You know, I like how Whiskey Whippet just rolled off your tongue. You didn't even pause. You didn't even consider the potential of a whiskey cherub. You went straight to the Whiskey Whippet. Whippet.
Whippet. Real good. Real good. So this week, we're going to revisit a wee friend of ours.
Oh.
Old Brexit.
Yeah.
You know, we still talk about it in other places. I feel like we just talked about it in the last episode of One Nation Under Whiskey as well. It came up. We were talking about the end of tariffs. We were talking about COVID. Maybe we didn't bring up Brexit.
I'm not sure that we did, but we lump it into the things that we've decided were likely not a good idea.
You and I, not to give away too much from the riffing session, but you and I have started to suggest that Brexit maybe wasn't a good idea.
Yeah, it likely was not.
But let's save the deeper analysis for the second half. We've got a Forbes article authored by Philippe Schreiberg, which is a name you see a fair bit of around these whiskey stories. Philippe is making quite the name for himself, so well done, Philippe. The title of this is Brexit is costing the Scotch whisky industry £5 million a week. And that's a very strong headline.
Yeah, read that again, just so everybody gets that headline.
It's strong.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I should have led with the strength of it before I unleashed it. Oh.
You didn't take that headline out for air.
The headline is Brexit. So let me even drop, the is just me saying here is the headline. So the headline, : Brexit is costing the Scotch whisky industry £5 million a week.
A week. Per week, £5 million.
Yep, £20 a month, £240 million a year.
That's like 20 minutes of Jeff Bezos' time. Just think about that. Put that into perspective. Anyway, continue on with your story, please.
This is going to get political enough without getting Jeff Bezos' name involved. So
I'm sorry.
I was just letting that one slide for a moment. So, and now we follow this strong headline with a strong opening paragraph. Scotland's ruling party, the Scottish National Party, known as the SNP, have recently claimed that trade complications created by Brexit are costing the Scotch whisky industry £5 million, $6.9 million a week.
A week.
So we're off to a strong start here, where we've got one political party saying another political party is causing problems. So my very first question is, where are these numbers coming from? Mm-hmm. And Philippe has got our back.
Good.
The SNP used sales figures comparing sales from January to May 2021 to the same period in 2019, revealing that export levels were lower by £105.7 million, equivalent to $146.5 million. Lending strength to the argument is that European Union, sales figures following the end of the Brexit transition period from January to March 2021 dropped £135.9 million or $188.5 million compared to the same period in 2019. The UK government, led by the pro-Brexit Conservative Party, have called the claims misleading. saying that it is hard to draw conclusions in the wake of the effects of the COVID pandemic and rising export levels compared to 2020. Which, if I was them, I'd say the exact same thing.
Yeah, sure.
Right? How can you tell it's that disaster? It could be this disaster over here. Who can tell?
Stop trying to highlight this disaster I made. Please, let's look at this other one.
So here's what's lovely here. And again, this is a nice little touch by Philippe. Walking the tightrope between these two views is the Scotch Whisky Association, as we all know, the SWA, which represents the interests of the industry across trade and policy. And why I love this idea of this tightrope is you've got the UK's ruling party and the Conservatives, then Scotland's ruling party and the SNP.
Yeah.
And if you're the SWA, you're saying, how do we make a statement here that represents our industry but doesn't piss off one of these two groups when they're clearly at polar opposites from one another?
Yeah, I'd suggest they'd be walking a tightrope, but it sounds like our author already made that suggestion.
That's why Philippe makes the big bucks. In an official statement, the SWA, pointed out the rising levels of exports since a 2020 nadir, while also making clear that doing business in the EU has become more complicated thanks to the changes in trade that Brexit has created. And here comes the quote. It's a multi-paragraph quote.
Oh, all right.
The way Scotch whisky is exported to the European Union has changed since Brexit, and producers have had to adapt to changes to customs systems, labelling, and paperwork, as well as the withdrawal of some transport services. The quote continues, the level of exports fluctuates month by month, and this has been impacted over the past 18 months by both the COVID-19 pandemic as well as by the UK's departure from the EU, which is another one, right? Is it COVID? Is it Brexit? Why not both? The quote continues, while it was undoubtedly a tough start to the year for companies, the drop in exports in the first quarter is partly explained by increased exports in December 2020. Now that infection control measures in many of our global markets are easing, the pace of the industry's export recovery is encouraging. End quote. We'll come back to that lengthy quote in the second half of today's episode.
Okay.
Let's keep going with the article. The cost of doing business is certainly higher. We're back to Philippe now. The cost of doing business is certainly higher for Scotch whisky companies because of Brexit, and to some extent favour larger companies that can absorb the costs, while smaller producers might lose out. For example, the price of materials that come from the EU used in Scotch whisky has risen. The SNP Shadow Secretary of State for International Trade, Drew Hendry, claimed in June that the price of cardboard and glass used by the industry is up 12% and 7% respectively. So that's to say, cardboard is up 12%, glass is up 7%. Many UK retailers were also not shipping to the EU following the end of the transition period. The world's largest online whisky retailer, the Whisky Exchange,
Checks out.
has recently started shipping to the EU again after many months of not being able to do so, while another large online vendor, Master of Malt, is still not delivering to the EU.
Wow.
So there you go.
Wow.
Master Malt, they stopped shipping to the US when they were purchased by AB InBev. Now they're not shipping to the EU either.
Amazing. So they can only ship within the UK, and that's
Or Asia.
Or okay, yeah, good point. Okay, so not the US, not Europe, but the UK, potentially Asia,
Yeah.
maybe other spots. Okay.
What a shame to be landed with that Asian market. Gosh. What are they buying? What kind of money are they spending? Oh, they're buying everything all the time? Oh,
Oh,
interesting.
right. Yeah. Okay. Jeez.
Couple more paragraphs here. Despite Downing Street's protests, Brexit has also complicated the process of exporting despite the free trade agreement signed between the EU and UK. On its website covering Brexit, the SWA makes clear that there have been delays and disruptions to shipments, that exporting to the EU is now more expensive and complicated, and shipping to Northern Ireland is still problematic. I read that and I just see the word cluster in big capital letters, right?
Cluster.
Yeah, just cluster. Hashtag cluster.
Okay. All right.
Final paragraph from Philippe. Though Brexit has clearly not helped the Scotch whisky industry thus far, the picture is still rosier than 2020, when US tariffs and economic uncertainties from the COVID pandemic were also hitting overall sales hard. However, as the EU is one of the Scotch whisky industry's key markets, Brexit uncertainties are unlikely to go away any time soon.
There you go.
Everybody tucked in nicely?
I've tucked in. I have my little bear and my binky, and I'm ready.
Good night, COVID. Good night, tariffs. Oh, Brexit, you're still here. How about you? How about we go to a very short break? When I dropped that hard, strong headline upon you, Brexit is costing the Scotch whisky industry £5 million a week. And we ran with the claim the SNP was making against the Conservative government. Were you convinced as you listened to the rest of that article that there is a case for this being £5 million a week? Or did you, not putting words in your mouth, just hear this is costing some amount of money that might be difficult to determine because there are a number of other factors in play here?
Well, the first thing I did was grab a calculator, and I did 5 times 52 and got to 260 million pounds. So whether that is the number, I guess, will remain to be seen. But in listening to the article as you went on, well, let me back up a little bit. Yes, reading that headline, like most people would do these days, you'd say, my gosh, look how terrible Brexit is. It's ruining the Scotch whisky industry. But this is why it's important to read articles, because there simply is never black and white. It's obvious this isn't black and white. Has Brexit negatively affected the Scotch whisky industry? Of course it has. It's negatively affected a good number of things within the UK. But it's not the only thing that's gone on. I'm glad that Philippe pointed out, oh yeah, and by the way, this COVID thing happened. There was a global pandemic affecting things. I like that Philippe went a little deeper. What about you?
No, I was going to make the same point that you just made a moment ago, which is in this social media world, if you were anti-Brexit, you go, see, garbage. If you're pro-Brexit, you go, no, there's these other factors in play. Come on now.
Yeah,
right?
Fake news. Yeah.
Right? To really get into it. And at the end of the day, it's a quick article in Forbes,
Yeah.
right? That we're reading and quickly riffing on and then moving on to another thing. So yes, it is more complicated. The fact that cardboard pricing has gone up, the fact that glass has gone up, the fact that we are within a week, 10 days, 2 weeks of it being announced that 2,000 military personnel are being summoned to potentially drive tractor trailers, 18-wheel vehicles, lorries, trucks, call them what you will, to put food on supermarket shelves in the United Kingdom. There's serious fallout from Brexit. Whether or not you want to put a number on it, whether or not you want to compare it to 2019, whether or not you can clear out the weeds to move beyond the tariffs and COVID to say this is exactly the door of Brexit. Regardless of all of that, there is something serious in place here. And I would like to hear somebody say, here are the areas that need immediate focus for us to overcome some of these hurdles that we knew we would have to overcome, right? The fact that the UK and the EU set out to sign a free trade agreement, well, that was one of the key aspects people didn't want to walk away from with the relationship with the European Union.
Yep.
So when you rush back to signing that, you know the value of that. What's really wacky for me, being a 47-year-old Scot, someone who lived in the UK, from birth till 27, hearing Northern Ireland thrown in here, right? Northern Ireland is a part of the United Kingdom. And I know there were difficulties with that open border between the Republic of Ireland, which is the European Union, and Northern Ireland, which is the United Kingdom. Just that border was complicated and remains complicated. And so, is it complicated? Yes. Is it costing money? Well, undoubtedly, right?
Right.
Will the problems be resolved? I think that's the next stage. Because do we have Brexit? Yes, we do. Has it caused problems? Yes, it has. Did we know it was... Even if you were for or against Brexit, you knew there were challenges ahead.
You would hope you would know there are challenges ahead, yes.
Right? And so here we are dealing with these challenges. So let's move on to what's next. Where do we go here?
So can we back up a little bit back to the free trade agreement? So Brexit happens and people move to establish this free trade agreement that is in place, that has been signed. Is it in effect? Are you able to talk to our listeners a bit more on that free trade agreement?
I am not.
Yeah.
Nope.
Yep.
Nope. I don't know any more than I just read in this article. And why? Because of what we just talked about. What have you and I been dealing with in the US? The tariffs and COVID. As soon as Brexit went into effect, we've got Jess sitting in Glasgow, global sales manager. She's the one working with Germany. She's the one working with Sweden, right? She's the one working with, the Netherlands and Belgium to see what that looks like, right?
Yep.
Glass being made in France and coming in from France. She's the one dealing with that side of things.
Yeah, it's funny hearing that increase in cardboard at 12% sourced from the EU. The increase of glass at 7%, again, that glass imported from the EU. It makes me think of the statement that we had heard not too long ago when it was announced that here in the U.S. we could start using this 700 milliliter bottle, to which people would say, "Oh, that's fantastic. When's my discount coming?" Well, your difference from 750 milliliter to 700 milliliter is about 6.5%, which gets lost really quick in normal times. In normal times. That's why you would never see a decrease. And now, even if there was the possibility for a decrease, you've got an increase of 7% on glass and you've got an increase of 12% on cardboard. This is why when people hear of these things, the tariffs are going to come down, we're going to see prices drop, or we want to see prices drop, or bottle size change, we want to see prices drop. It's not as cut and dry. And when things happen, when things are announced, when bills are put into place, or when tariffs are removed, the reaction is not as immediate as the action.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's why we've got super savvy consumers listening to this podcast. They're informed. They get it. They see why the money is the money. Can I bring us back to the SWA quote?
Yeah, please. That was the 2-paragraph quote you had, right?
Yeah. It's multi, yeah. But again, just to reiterate what we said in the first half, you've got Philippe, the author, saying, walking the tightrope enters the SWA. So I wanted to return to this quote and say, okay, what is the SWA saying here? Because they make no appeals to the money, which is interesting because with the tariff situation, they did attach a number to what was being lost through tariffs. And so maybe there's a bigger quote. I feel like if there was a number in their statement, Philippe would have used it. So I'm listening carefully to their words here. This is the SWA quote. The way Scotch whisky is exported to the European Union has changed since Brexit. There you go. Solid statement. And producers have had to adapt to changes to customs systems, labelling, and paperwork, as well as the withdrawal of some transport services. That's been the really shocking part, is now if you're trying to get a freight forwarder, a carrier, to take your pallet of cases off to another European country, there are some saying, no, sorry, not touching it. We're not doing that part of the business anymore.
Okay, continue with the quote. I do have a comment regarding that particular bit.
Yeah, go on. Yeah, throw it in now because we're going to go in a different direction here.
Well, again,
with the quote.
Again, with the spirit of this not being cut and dry, this not being black or white, I wonder if we weren't in the middle of a global container shortage due to the COVID pandemic, if freight companies might have a different stance through this, transition of Brexit as the UK figures itself out through this, the end of this relationship between them and the European Union.
Potentially, but I think of something that Jess said the other day in our meeting, which was European lorry drivers are paid by the kilometre.
By the kilometre, yeah.
As they're now coming into the UK to make goods and they're sitting at port going nowhere, they're making no money on that. And so you say, okay, that's not a route we're going to do anymore.
But why are they sitting there waiting? Are they sitting there waiting because they don't have the containers? It's paperwork.
No, it's paperwork. Yeah,
okay.
It's the paperwork.
Yeah.
And so that's been part of the SWA's statement here, right? There's now new paperwork. When we talk to our bottling hall, they're talking about the new paperwork that's part of exports.
You are right.
Going into the EU. So I agree with you. Yeah, COVID is giving us a less than level playing field here. But these trade changes have really screwed the pooch at the worst possible time.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Double whammy. Yep.
Right. So back to the SWA quote, and why I was happy for your comment there is they go off to talk about COVID here.
Good.
The level of exports fluctuates month by month, and this has been impacted over the past 18 months by both the COVID-19 pandemic as well as by the UK's departure from the EU.
There you go. There you go.
While it was undoubtedly a tough start to the year for companies, the start of the year being Brexit, the drop in exports in the first quarter is partly explained by increased exports in December 2020. The reason I wanted to come back to this quote is for that very point, right? So they've cleverly set up that exports fluctuate month by month.
Yes.
What they're now saying in the next sentence is, given that everybody knew it was going to be Brexit January 2021, and we lived through this, goodness gracious, the end of last year was insane. Look how many companies rushed to clear their exports by the conclusion of December 2020, so they were not touching Brexit in January 2021 or February or March. Like that first quarter of 2021, folk just tried to stay out of that game, right?
Yeah.
And if you didn't get it exported out of the UK by the close of December 2020, you walked right into a Brexit shit show.
Wow. Wow.
And so now the final statement here from SWA. Now that infection control measures in many of our global markets are easing, the pace of the industry's export recovery is encouraging. So, just like any good business, you spend some time working out, okay, what is the new normal? You throw money at the problem. You hire people to do your paperwork to make sure that it goes a little easier. You've now got the free trade agreement, and I'm happy to skip along to that paragraph in just a moment as well. And you've got the easing of some of COVID. Yeah. Right? And so now we're moving, here we are now, 3/4, more or less, of the way through 2021. We're now starting to see an easing, right? The beginning of an easing. But as you point out, as the article points out, but cardboard is still more expensive. Glass is still more expensive. Shipping containers still aren't as readily available as they had been. But now we're even hearing sea freight might be easing, right? Maybe that's another way to go again. So it feels like an ongoing. I do quite like the tempered nature of the SWA statement here,
and that's what I was just going to say. Yeah, I think Philippe's introduction to those few paragraphs was perfect. It's obvious they're talking about both sides. They're not pointing fingers. They're just saying horrible situation made even worse because of COVID. Yeah.
Let me just return to this paragraph with the free trade agreement in it, and then we'll call it an episode. Despite Downing Street's protests, Brexit has also complicated the process of exporting, despite the free trade agreement signed between the EU and UK. That's it. There's no more information on that.
Yeah.
On its website covering Brexit, the SWA makes clear that there have been delays and disruptions to shipments, that exporting to the EU is now more expensive and complicated, and shipping to Northern Ireland is still problematic. So there you go. So even if you get the government saying, we have the free trade in place, things still changed. Paperwork still changed. Things still got complicated. Shipments still got delayed. It still wasn't a seamless transition. And here we are losing some quantity of money on a weekly basis for all of those factors. But might it resolve? Might it get easier? Yeah, it might. Hopefully.
Didn't Douglas Adams have something to say about paperwork in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy? I feel as if
I would assume so. I can't think of it off the top of my head. Yeah.
But it's just amazing that, obviously that this is a big change, right? The UK is no longer part of the EU. But the fact, it just amazes me that, okay, guys, deal's off. Now let's have 5,000 pounds of paperwork to do everything we'd been doing just fine before then. It's just, you know what someone said to me the other day, and it was a saying that I heard years ago, and I'm pleasantly reminded of it every now and again. And the quote is, play stupid games, win stupid prizes. And that is just, that's Brexit to me.
Yeah. And knowing that it was going to be difficult, knowing it was going to be problematic, and to think that tariffs got thrown on top of that, and a global pandemic got thrown on top of that. Right, the fact there still is a whiskey industry is somewhat startling. Like, the fact there are any industries is somewhat startling.
Very
right,
true.
The resolve of our human brothers and sisters is absolutely remarkable. In just kind of saying, okay, let's roll up our sleeves and let's make something work. And here we are.
Yeah,
it is interesting though, reading back there and just thinking for that split second of the difference between December 2020 and January 2021, and just thinking how impossibly difficult last November, December was for all of us in Single Cask Nation.
Well, it'll be interesting following this free trade agreement that the article talks about. You know, it's obvious that's a point that it's obvious that's something you and I know very little, if anything, about. So we need to get ourselves caught up on that, because obviously that will hopefully positively affect our business dealings within the European Union. So, but, you know, having said that, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, I bet Jess already knows all of the ins and outs about this. She's on the up and up. She knows her stuff, so we could just ask her.
Paging Jess Lomas. If you, dear listener, would like to reach out to us, just use the old questions@onenationunderwhiskey.com email address. We do always love hearing from you, and if you've got a recommendation for a story that you're seeing in your neck of the woods, we'd love to give it a read, potentially use it on a future episode of Extra Extra. In the meantime, Joshua Hatton, we better take a look at the clock and get ourselves out of here. See if we've made this a tight 30 or 35 minutes.
I think it may be a tight 35 minutes, 17 seconds.
I think we're in the wheelhouse. Until later, my friend.
It's been real, Jason. Thank you, sir.
Cheers, mate.
Cheers.
Cheers, listeners.
Cheers. One elephant, two elephant, three elephant, four elephant, five elephant.
Was that too slow? I liked my rhythm, but I didn't know if it was maybe too slow.
It got me there.
It was consistent.
It was consistent.
It was building to a denouement.
Yes. Yeah, it got me right in the denouement.
In the denouement. Almost makes me think of a brand of yogurt. But anyway.
Oh, yeah. Try new denouement with the fruit on the bottom. Denouement with the fruit on the bottom.
I think that would take off.